Well, welcome to the Cannon Beach Library's Northwest Author Speaker Series. This is the second of our virtual talks. We're finalizing our schedule for the rest of this year and for 2021. And I encourage you all to check our website at cannonbeachlibrary.org for details. We're grateful that technology makes it possible for us to continue our Northwest Author Speaker Series virtually when we can't meet in person. And we're very grateful today to welcome Portland writer Paula Butterfield. Paula Butterfield was born in New York City and raised in Portland. She's been writing since childhood, and she earned an MFA in professional writing from the School of Cinema at the University of Southern California. And she's worked as a story analyst for United Artists. Paula is an award-winning writer. She was awarded the Moondance International Film Festival Award, a Kay Snow Award from the Willamette Writers Conference, and the Chaucer Award for Best Women's Historical Fiction from Chanticleer Book Reviews for her debut novel, La Luministe. As an undergraduate, Paula noticed that virtually no women artists were mentioned, much less studied in her art history class, historical fiction about women artists, notably La Luministe, her fictional biography of French Impressionist artist Berthe Morisot. It's a compelling story, beautifully written. Reviewers have called it a must-read, utterly arresting, and an exceptional work of art. And so, Paula, take it away.
This is my book right here. It's actually pronounced La Luministe. Can you see this? This is called At the Ball. And the reason I wanted to show it to you is because it's only seen in part on the cover. And I think it's important because it shows the language of the fan. Now, in Berthe's time, women were supposed to be discreet almost to the point of invisibility, but they developed a whole language around their fan usage. They developed courses about women in the arts to teach. It was during second wave feminism, and that's when a lot of stuff was just coming to the surface. For instance, somebody was cleaning out an attic and found a musical score by not Felix Mendelssohn, but his sister, Fanny Mendelssohn. Or somebody was digging out old paintings from the basement of a museum and cleaning them and finding a woman's signature underneath what had been a man's signature. So it was a very exciting time. The information I was finding out about these women artists was sketchy. All right, there's the title. Here's the first image I want to show you. I'm trying to show you the context in which she was painting and came to be an artist. Young women such as herself and her sister Edma were expected to do certain things. For instance, they might take tea with friends. This image is by Mary Cassatt, and especially the male artists talking about the art of the day. So they had to make do with just having tea at these places. Now I love this painting. This is a musical evening, which was another acceptable place for women to gather. And this young woman is trying to give a violin performance, but look at how everybody's chatting each other up over on the right-hand side and being a little too social. And the name of the painting is Hush. Another thing you could do besides taking tea or going to hear music was you would do your errands every day. And hopefully you'd have this errand, which was to go to the chocolate shop and stock up for when you had your friends over for tea or dinner. Here's a woman picking up flowers, again, to decorate her dining table or to visit someone. You might have been a little rebellious and been a bicyclist. But the main thing women did was shopping. Here's some more department stores. The Bon Marché is on the left and Le Printemps on the right. This was a very glamorous shopping experience for these women. But Berthe and her sister, I think, would have been happier in this paint shop because when Berthe was about 15, her mother got the idea to have Berthe and her sister do portraits of each other as gifts for their father for his birthday. And they just really took to their art lessons. and in a much bigger way than their mother ever anticipated. And in fact, it wasn't long before she was telling people, I knew I was in trouble when my girls were painting half of every day. It's a dichotomy. On the one hand, young women were encouraged to perfect some kind of arts. In fact, they could become quite expert at something. Berthe's mother had even studied opera, but it was understood that the minute you married, that was over. You were just going to take care of your household and your family. Berthe didn't quite understand that. So, okay, let me tell you a little bit about the art school. L'École des Beaux-Arts was where all the young men went who wanted to study art. And that was the academy. And the academy ran the entire art world. Not only did you take lessons there, but you had studios there. Would-be patrons would come and tour the studios and decide whose paintings to buy. And once a year they had a salon, which is where they exhibited their work and got prizes. The grand prize was 5 years in Rome to study art. And of course, no women could ever get that. Now, that's not to say that there weren't women professional artists. Art wasn't the way we think of it more now, where it's you're waiting for the muse. It was a matter of record. This is how you had images of people in the news, events in the news, recorded family images. It was a profession. So working class women had a couple of schools they could go to that were just for would-be women artists, and then they would go on to a profession. Or if you were of the aristocratic class, I think you know that if you're wealthy and powerful enough, people make a space for you to be as eccentric as you want to be. So there were those two options. Now, if you were like Berthe, you were upper middle class, and that's where you're firmly in what I call the prison of privilege. Her father was in the Department of Treasury. He had been mayor of a couple of cities before that. The rules for the middle class were so rigid that women were very, very stifled. Now, what they were allowed to do was hire a private tutor who would meet them at the Louvre, and they would copy paintings by the old masters, and that's how they learned to paint. And it shows two women copying paintings. This is by Etienne Azambre, if you're interested. These women painting, you can see they're very serious about it. The woman in the middle is wearing the typical garb, which is a velvet jacket, which was to protect their clothing. She's got her palette, and the woman at the big canvas has her maul stick. Now, a maul stick was like a bamboo rod with a ball of rags or rubber at the end, and you would hold it against your canvas and then rest your wrist on it to steady your hand when you were painting. What else can we see in this painting that might be interesting to you? There's just all kinds of people, and yeah, women were allowed to do this at least. Okay, and this image is by Winslow Homer, by the way. Okay, now, another good thing about getting to copy at the Louvre is that Berthe and her sister Edma were able to meet other artists. There was no other way they could have met them. So if their teacher was around, he could introduce them, and that would be proper. Now, the main person you'd want to meet would be Edouard Manet, and this is he. He was the most radical artist of the time. He was also considered very dapper. He was a ladies' man. He was considered very handsome and well-dressed, but also a very radical artist. Now, this is a self-portrait of him on the left. And can you see the difference between this on the left and the one on the right? The one on the left is just sketchier. It's just more of an impression. But I don't want you to think he was an impressionist. He was more like the godfather of the impressionists. The painting on the right is by his friend Fantin Latour. Who can I compare him to? I would have to say, here's an actual photograph of him, by the way, that he was the Mick Jagger of 1868. He was the rock star of the art world. So Berthe did meet him at the Louvre, and there was an immediate connection between them, although she was very young, quite a bit younger than him. In fact, now I'll show you her picture painted by her sister Edna. Nope, wait, I got ahead of myself. This is a painting in the perfect academic style that the Academy preferred. It's so polished that the word that they used was called licht in French, just completely polished and perfect. This young girl, it's called The Harvest. It's very pastoral, but in reality, nobody actually painted anything out of doors at all. So this is all in the studio, and he just filled in the background on his own. Now, it's very hard to find a comparable painting of a child by Manet because he didn't have too much use for children, but I did find one, just so you can see the comparison. This is young girl on a bench. Now look at the difference in style here. It's just sketchy. The canvas is bare in some parts. The face is very indistinct. I mean, look at the difference. And this is the more spontaneous style he was trying to usher in. Okay, now, here's Berthe. She's 17 years old, intensely involved in her canvas, and her sister did this painting. Okay, now I'd like to read you a little excerpt from my book about Berthe meeting Manet at the Louvre. Here are Berthe and Edna Morisot copying paintings at the Louvre and meeting Manet. We had been immersed in our work, copying Titian's Woman with a Mirror, when the silence was broken by the approaching tap, tap, tap of a silver-tipped cane on the shining parquet floor. I looked up to see the most revered and reviled artist in Paris swagger the length of the gallery. "It's Edouard Manet," I hissed to my sister. She slipped me the look out of the corner of her eye and gave the slightest of nods in acknowledgement. I recognized Manet from our friend Fantin's portrait of him, but he was more handsome in person, with a long, narrow nose and dark blonde wavy hair and whiskers. He was tall and looked even taller in his glossy black silk top hat. Dressed in well-cut clothes and fine leather gloves and boots, with a wooden paint case tucked under his arm. The melancholy sea shanty he whistled contrasted with his elegance and sent shivers up my arms. "Comment ça va, mon ami?" Manet greeted Fantin with a vulpine grin, ignoring the murmurs of those around him. They bantered and joked for a bit, their deep laughter resounding up to the skylights. I had never known anyone to make the earnest Fantin laugh. And then they turned toward Edna and me, the shift sudden enough for them to catch me staring. Although he appeared to be no more than 10 years older than me, Manet smiled as one smiles at a precocious child. True, on his side of that decade divide was a life of independence, even decadence. While on my side, I still lived the life of a child, but I was not a child. I was almost alone. Absorbed in my thoughts, I failed to notice that Fantin had crept up behind me. "Mademoiselle," he said in his most proper diction, "allow me to introduce you to Monsieur Edouard Manet." I swung around on my stool, discerning the faint scent of lilacs amid the odor of oil paints around us. "How delightful it is to meet lady painters." Manet's voice was a husky sailor's drawl. One does not encounter them in art school. His eyes swept over me and came to rest on, I didn't follow his glance to see where it landed. From my vantage point on my stool, facing his chest and square shoulders, I focused on his beard that was brushed into 2 tidy points. "As long as we are not permitted to attend l'École des Beaux-Arts, this is our school," came a low-voiced retort. From me, I was astonished to realize. Manet clucked his tongue and smiled in approval. "You have a sharp wit for someone so soft-spoken. I have no doubt that you will learn quickly from the old masters and mistresses." I dared to look up at Manet from under my dark eyebrows with what Mamma called my fierce expression. "Mistresses? Certainly you will not find any women's paintings on these walls." I could see that Edna was horrified. Why was I saying these things? Had I lost my mind, speaking with such discourtesy to a superior artist? I must also have lost control of my body because with an awkward jerk back to my painting, I dropped my bamboo maul stick. I wish my bandeau weren't holding back my chaotic curls. I would have liked to hide behind my hair at that moment. Monsieur Manet swooped down to recover the stick and present it to me with a flourish. Not yet, he said, his thin lips spreading into a mocking smile. Perhaps yours will be the first. So I have more to show you, but I wonder, thank you, Elizabeth. I wonder if you have any comments or questions at this point.
Yeah, I have a question. Paula?
Okay. Yes, Phyllis.
Yeah, I was wondering, I have two questions. I guess they're kind of related. Like one is, why did you pick Morisot for your first novel? And my other question is, why did you decide to do a novel instead of writing a biography of Morisot?
I like filling in the blanks. You know, you can read the facts about her life, but what was she thinking and feeling? That's what I wanted to figure out, what motivated her. And also the books by Susan Breland were coming out about that time. Anybody ever read anything by her? The Passion of Artemisia, The Forest Lover. Yeah, I'm seeing some nods. And I thought, I didn't even know you could do this, make up things about these women artists. And it kind of gave me permission to do that. And that's why I went ahead and did it. What's your other question, Phyllis?
Well, so I imagine that you did some changing of her life for your novel. So what did you change, and how did you decide what to change? So your novel would do what it was you wanted it to do.
Some decisions make themselves. Sometimes the chronology doesn't just fit in smoothly the way you would like it to. So you might change one event back a couple of years so that it flows together. But anything I did try to mention in my author's note. So you don't have to think that the whole thing is just made up. You can see which things I changed. I think I mentioned that, for instance, there was, Manet had another brother that I don't mention at all because he had nothing to do with the story. What else? I changed Berthe's age that she met Manet because this is something that happens in historical fiction. It's hard for people to believe that mores were so different and that you could reach a certain age and still never have been alone to talk to a man. I think Berthe was actually 23 when she and Manet kind of got together. But I thought it was more believable if I did the first time they actually met, which was when she was 17. All right, back to Berthe. I wanted to show you this image of the Bois de Boulogne, which is a forested area. It's a forest in Paris, which was Berthe's getaway. It was within walking distance of her house where she grew up. And that's where she went to get fresh air and the most freedom that she would experience in her young life. An interesting factoid, the Bois de Boulogne and Forest Park in Portland are the only two forests within city limits of any city on the planet. Don't you think that's kind of cool? Okay, so Berthe had more obstacles before her than just being excluded from l'École des Beaux-Arts, including her mother's full press efforts to get her married off. And that was a real pain. There were different men coming to dinner every night, just trying, and not always desirable men. One time her mother ran up to her bedroom and said, "Come down quickly. I can't spend 15 more minutes with that idiot waiting for you." So, but in addition to that, there was a war. And Paris was put under siege by the Prussian army. So let me show you what the Bois de Boulogne looked like at that point. This is called the Bois de Boulogne denuded of trees. And you can see that that's pretty sad. Okay, I'll just show you some more about the siege. This is the elephant at the zoo being we froze up for a minute. You know how that happens. All right, we're back. And you're all still here. I'm really impressed. Those were just a few images from the siege of Paris. And so now I'm going to read a little excerpt just because I feel like it's timely for us to think about the hard times that these Parisians went through. This is Berthe and her mother taking a walk through the Bois de Boulogne. It was difficult to imagine any need to prepare for war on a glorious day in the Bois de Boulogne as Mama and I strolled under a canopy of jewel-colored leaves through warm September breezes. But I took note of changes. There should not have been thousands of sheep and cows grazing in the meadows, brought by farmers from the outskirts of the city who thought to protect their livestock by bringing their herds within city limits. And there should not have been soldiers in their red and blue uniforms trotting their horses down the tree-shaded boulevards, where normally fashionable people rode by in their carriages. What seemed impossible to believe must be true. War was approaching. We continued in silence, Mama and I, enjoying the beautiful autumn afternoon until we passed under the archway that led us out of the park, from heaven to hell. The street was thronged with Parisians trying to escape the city and people from the provinces arriving to seek refuge in it. The privileged crowded into carriages, followed by furniture vans pulled by straining horses. The less fortunate struggled with carts piled high with mattresses, chairs, and cookpots, with children in bird cages balanced on top. A cacophony of clomping horses, church bells, and frantic shouting assailed us. It appears that everyone but us is leaving Paris, I said, forcing myself to sound calm amidst the mayhem. These people were running for their lives. Did they imagine Prussian soldiers invading Passy? Cannonballs shooting into the Bois? Cowards, Mama choked out the word, her strongest censure. As we passed a gentleman hustling his family into a carriage, she raised her voice to say, "This is not my idea of how a man should behave." She was thinking, no doubt, of my brother, Tiburce. Never able to settle upon an occupation, Tiburce had seen the war as an opportunity to embark upon a military career. He'd been among the first to enlist and the first to be captured at the Battle of Sedan, and he was now imprisoned in Mayence. "They say the German line will form at Passy," the indignant gentleman responded. "Shall I not protect my family?" It was plain to see that escape was the only protection he had to offer. His bald head and weak chin made him look as defenseless as a tortoise without its shell. He climbed up next to the carriage driver, shouting, "To the train station!" I wished Papa would see fit to take us away from Paris, but he felt we were protected by his government position and social status. My position and status as the only unmarried daughter in the family dictated that it was my duty to stay with my parents. One of the peddlers working his way through the crowds, a young boy crying, "Papier," stepped in front of me. "Mademoiselle, paper and pencil to write your will?" Appalled, I could only shake my head before I hurried to catch up with Mama, who had sailed down the street with her head held high. In October, Mama and I made one last foray to the Bois. In little more than a month, the forested park had been sacrificed for firewood. Only a vast field of tree stumps, sharpened to deter invaders, remained. The sheep and cows had disappeared from the meadows. Then the zoo animals, the camel and the antelope and the peacocks, were slaughtered at local butcher shops that were hard-pressed to provide meat for the 2 million citizens who remained in Paris. Word spread that when Castor and Pollux, the beloved elephants that I remembered swaying from side to side, when patriotic songs drifted from the bandstand, were shot, their keeper collapsed, weeping, in their pen. The hungry lion and tigers who remained dared anyone to approach them. Okay, and then I can show you some more pictures. Just a little bit about the rest of her life. What was really key about the siege is that, much like many of us during the pandemic, she really figured out what she wanted to do when it was all over. I don't know if any of you have come up with anything like that, but she became laser focused on, I don't care about the obstacles, I'm going to become a well-known professional artist, and that's it. And it was still a few years, but she did it. She did it. As soon as the siege was lifted, Berthe went to visit her sister, Edma. Now, just as an aside, Edma and Berthe had sworn to make art their life. But when Edma turned 30, she succumbed to marriage. She just felt that the societal pressure was too much. She married a naval officer, and this was another form of freedom for Berthe. She was allowed to go visit Edma at whatever location her husband was stationed at. So this is the harbor at Lorient, one of Berthe's most famous paintings. She loved painting the sea. Look at this one, the boats at Cherbourg. I mean, quite different from this. This is several years later when she's trying to capture with sketchy strokes the movement of not just the sea, but the air. And she became obsessed with light. And so she was always trying to show the atmosphere, the light and the movement of the air itself. And this is the port at Nice. And again, you can see the reflection of light in the water, the movement that she does through her sketchy calligraphic strokes. Okay, what do we have? Now, by this point, Berthe had come of age. This is her on the right in her first designer gown by Worth, and her hair is up now, it's not down. She loved this dress so much that she kept it and had models wear it for her. On the left, you can see a painting she did of a model wearing her dress, and there's a couple more of those too. I just thought that was interesting, and I wanted you to see her now as a mature woman. And she did marry. Okay, well, I won't give away anything, but she did marry, and then her mother was widowed and became ill. She came to live with Berthe and her husband. So Berthe still wanted to paint, so she just took up painting in her mother's bedroom. And I call these the boudoir paintings. And this is called the Psyche mirror. The full-length mirror like that was called the Psyche mirror. And she just really encapsulated the intimacy of a woman's boudoir. And this is woman before the mirror, or woman at her toilette. And you can see that not only was Berthe obsessed with the motion, the air, she also wanted her palette to get lighter and lighter. She wanted the figure to kind of blend with the background. Her brushwork was so far ahead of her time. I'm going to say it was 100 years ahead of her time, because compare it to, this is by Joan Mitchell, an artist from 100 years later, say the 1960s and 70s. This is called Sale Neige, dirty snow, but just look at the strokes up above. Not unlike Berthe's. Okay. I just wanted to show you this painting Berthe did of a friend, because she did not always have models. Not only no studio, but no models. But this is her friend, Louise Reisner, and she just did this sort of sketchy painting of her. On the other hand, sometimes she did have models. And this is a young woman before the ball. And she got into this mode of sort of cocooning her figures with this greenery and foliage. And she was trying to show women's interior life. She's showing this woman is nervous by having the background sort of vibrating behind her. And then Berthe had her daughter, the light of her life. And after that, her daughter Julie was a model for many, many of her paintings. Here's Julie with a doll. And here's Berthe as a middle-aged woman at work. I couldn't find, there's another image, the same image, only it's bigger, and it shows little Julie down below. So Berthe's trying to paint with her little anchor right by her. It's very unidealized. It's just a woman working. And here's Julie, a little older with her dog. And then later in her life, Impressionism was over. Art movements come and go. And due to her growing close friendship with Renoir, he got her more interested in Renaissance techniques again. So you can see these winding shapes. Look at the shapes that white makes going all the way down, and the long brush strokes, not the sketchy little brush strokes anymore. This is considered her masterpiece. It's almost life-size. Here is a portrait of Berthe and Julie by Renoir later in her life. And I just wanted to end with a picture of her studio. When she was living at home, their father built a studio in the home's courtyard for Berthe and Edma. But between that time And when Berthe herself became a widow, she never had a studio. She would paint in her living room or her bedroom and put everything away at night. Now, if you're even into crafts, you know what a pain that is, to try to put everything away, get it all out again the next morning. So when she was widowed, she knocked out 3 maids' rooms in the attic, which they hadn't used, and made herself this studio. And I like to think of her being there. Berthe left 400 paintings. She was the first Impressionist to have a work purchased by the state and put in a museum. And she was called La Grande Dame de Peinture, the Great Lady of Painting. The other Impressionists called her La Luministe, the Painter of Light. So if you have any questions or comments, just a little hand. Yes, Linda.
Are you an artist?
I've taken art classes. I don't identify as an artist. I identify as a writer. Yeah, but I'm an art appreciator, all right. I taught about it for 20 years, so.
Great.
Yes.
Yes.
I have a question. So,
Yes.
So in your courses, you know, you made a profession basically of going and finding information about little known women artists, and they're little known only because they were women.
Right.
So I'm kind of interested in what resources do you have? I mean, how do you go about doing research on an artist that is virtually unknown now?
Books were starting to come out. Like I said, it was the result of second wave feminism. So a big part of my paltry budget was buying whatever books I could find that had little bits, and I'd put them together and then compare that artist to another one, and then compare those artists to the men that were popular at the time, and kind of figure it out for myself, what their trajectories were and what their aims were. I hope I've made you curious about Berthe. You can get my book here at the library, or if you're going to buy it, which of course I love, it's nice to support your local independent bookstore. I mean, across the street here, we've got the Cannon Beach Book Company. We've got Beach Books in Seaside, Cloud and Leaf in Manzanita. That's a really good way to buy books if you want bookstores to stay open. There's also, my book's also available, you know, in book form or in Kindle form through Barnes & Noble. You can get it from my publisher, Regal House Publishing, or Amazon. And I also invite you to follow me on Twitter. I don't know if any of you are Twitter people, but several times a week I try to post paintings by women, art or sculpture, anything, artwork by women, with little interesting factoids about them that you might not have heard elsewhere. And it's just kind of a nice thing to check out and see and brighten your day a little bit. And also, and it's on Instagram. And then also you can go to Pinterest, where I have tons of images, such as I've shown you today, to kind of illustrate the book that has no illustrations. If no one else has any questions, I'd like to ask you a question. Okay, I'm trying to figure out what my next book is going to be. I've got 2 of them written. And then, you know, you can only really push one at a time and try to find a publisher and everything. So I'm just going to tell you very briefly about each one, and then maybe you could vote and tell me which one interests you, if either of them does. One is about a Civil War era mixed race woman who had to leave the United States and go live in Europe to be able to do what she wanted to do. And she became internationally known. Then when her style of work fell out of favor, she disappeared. We don't really know what happened to her. Okay, so that's one. The other one is in 1950s New York, about 2 rival women artists. And with that, I will say au revoir, and thanks again so much for coming.